My son had strictly forbidden me from ever visiting Aguila Vista Ranch, but after he passed away, his lawyer handed me the keys and said, "It now belongs to you, Mrs. Mendoza." My hands trembled as I held those cold metal keys, having no idea they would unlock not just a property, but a web of lies that would change everything I thought I knew about my family. I'm Ava Mendoza, 64 years old, a retired high school Spanish teacher from Phoenix, Arizona. I raised my son Diego alone after my husband Carlos died of heart failure when Diego was only 10. For 30 years, I poured everything into giving Diego a good life, working extra jobs, skipping vacations, postponing my own dreams. When he married Elena Blackwood, the daughter of former state senator Richard Blackwood, I thought my son had found happiness and security. I had no idea that this powerful family would eventually try to steal everything from me, including my son's memory. The morning of Diego's funeral was unnaturally cold for Phoenix. I sat rigid as stone in the first pew of St. Maria Cathedral, forcing myself not to collapse under the crushing weight of grief. My granddaughter Sophia, just 15, sat beside me, her eyes red but dry, her fingers constantly moving across her phone screen. She hadn't cried, not once, since we received the news of her father's sudden heart attack 3 days earlier. It's just like Carlos, I thought. The same disease that took my husband has now taken my son. The cruel symmetry was almost too much to bear. Elena, my daughter-in-law, sat on Sophia's other side, sobbing dramatically into a handkerchief. Her parents, Richard and Victoria Blackwood, stood nearby in expensive black attire, receiving condolences with practiced grace and cold smiles. Victoria's designer mourning dress probably cost more than my entire wardrobe, and Richard's handshake was firm as he spoke with the guests, his eyes never showing a hint of genuine emotion. Something about the way they controlled the funeral made me feel like an outsider. This was my son, my only child, yet I felt like just another guest. When Victoria patted my shoulder and whispered, "We've taken care of everything, Ava," it didn't feel like comfort. It felt like I was being pushed aside. After the service, Richard stood up to speak about Diego, his voice steady and commanding. My son-in-law was a brilliant man who brought so much to our family business. We're committed to continuing his legacy. But what legacy? Diego was a geological engineer who worked for an environmental consulting firm. He'd never mentioned any involvement with Blackwood Enterprises. When I tried to talk to Elena about the discrepancy later that day, she brushed me off. "Mom, please, not today. The Blackwoods have been incredibly supportive. Without them, I don't know how I'd manage the estate." Estate? What estate? As far as I knew, Diego and Elena lived in a modest home in Scottsdale. They both had good jobs but weren't wealthy. At least that's what I thought. 1 week after the funeral, Gabriel Ortega, Diego's lawyer and an old family friend, called me. "Ava, I need to see you in my office. It's about Diego's will." I drove to his small downtown office, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Gabriel's face was grave as I entered. He pushed a thick manila envelope across his desk. "This is Diego's will," he said, his voice low. "He updated it 3 months ago." I opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside were legal documents and a set of keys, old heavy keys that looked like they belonged to an ancient hacienda. "Diego left you full ownership of a property called Aguila Vista Ranch," Gabriel explained. "It's about 2 hours from Phoenix near the New Mexico border." The name hit me like a physical blow. Aguila Vista, the place Diego had mentioned with fear in his eyes when he was just a boy. "Mom," he'd said, "never go to Aguila Vista. Promise me." I thought it was just childish imagination. But now, there must be some mistake. I said, my throat tight. "Diego never owned a ranch." Gabriel shook his head. "He purchased it 3 years ago. The deed is clear, but there's something else, Ava." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "The Blackwoods were at my office yesterday. They're contesting the will." "On what grounds?" "They claim Diego wasn't of sound mind when he made these changes. They're saying the property should go to Elena as his wife." I felt a chill run down my spine. But that's ridiculous. Diego was perfectly healthy until his heart attack. Gabriel finished, his expression unreadable. "Ava, there's more to this story than I understand. Diego was very clear about his wishes. He wanted you to have Aguila Vista, and he was adamant that Elena and her family never gain control of it." As I drove home, I noticed a black SUV with tinted windows following me. It maintained a consistent distance, turning when I turned. My heart pounded as I took an unexpected detour, and the vehicle fell back, disappearing at the next intersection. By the time I reached my house, my hands were shaking. Inside, I locked the door and sank into my armchair, the keys to Aguila Vista heavy in my palm. Why would Diego leave me a property he'd forbidden me to visit? And why were the Blackwoods so determined to take it from me? I decided then that I needed to see this place for myself. The next morning I rose before dawn. I packed a small bag with essentials, not knowing what I might find at Aguila Vista. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not even my sister Isabella, who had been calling daily since the funeral. Something told me to keep this journey to myself. As I pulled out of my driveway, the same black SUV from yesterday was parked across the street. My pulse quickened, but I forced myself to drive normally, heading toward the interstate, as if going shopping. After several deliberate turns and a loop through a mall parking lot, I confirmed I'd lost my tail. The drive to Aguila Vista took me through changing landscapes, from the sprawling suburbs of Phoenix to the open desert, and finally into rolling hills dotted with mesquite and juniper trees. The elevation increased, the air grew cooler, and the terrain more rugged. My mind drifted to a memory from 20 years ago. Diego, just 12 years old, had woken screaming from a nightmare. "Mom," he'd cried, clutching my hand, "don't ever go to Aguila Vista. Bad things happen there." When I'd asked what Aguila Vista was, he couldn't explain, or wouldn't. I'd assumed it was something from a movie or a story he'd heard. Now, driving along this lonely road, his fear seemed almost prophetic. After nearly 2 hours, my GPS indicated I was approaching my destination. A weathered wooden sign came into view, Aguila Vista Ranch, carved in faded letters. The gate was tall and imposing, its iron bars rusted but solid. The padlock looked new and congruous against the aged metal. I inserted the key with trembling fingers. It turned with a satisfying click, and the gate swung open with a haunting creak. I drove through my tires, crunching on the gravel road that stretched ahead. What I saw next left me breathless. Instead of the abandoned, decrepit property I'd imagined, Aguila Vista was beautifully maintained. The main house stood proudly on a gentle hill, a sprawling southwestern hacienda with adobe walls and a red-tiled roof. Around it, several outbuildings and stables formed a horseshoe shape. The landscape was a testament to careful stewardship. Drought-resistant native plants, well-maintained fences, and solar panels discreetly positioned to catch the Arizona sun. This was no neglected inheritance. This was a cherished property, loved and cared for. I parked in front of the main house, my mind whirling with questions. As I stepped out of my car, the scent of desert sage and distant rain filled my lungs. The silence was profound, broken only by the gentle whistle of wind through the canyon beyond. The front door was solid oak with intricate carvings. The key slid into the lock easily as if it had been recently oiled. Inside, I found myself in a spacious living room with exposed wooden beams, terracotta tiles, and furniture that combined rustic charm with modern comfort. Everything was immaculate. Not a speck of dust, not a cushion out of place. Someone had been here recently. Framed photographs lined a bookshelf, and I moved closer to examine them. My breath caught in my throat. There was Diego smiling beside a magnificent black horse. Another showed him working on the roof of a small cabin. In a third, he stood proudly next to what appeared to be a newly installed windmill. My son had been here, often from the looks of it. He had built this place, shaped it, loved it, and he had never once mentioned it to me. On the central coffee table sat a silver laptop, its surface gleaming in the afternoon light that streamed through the large windows. Next to it lay a single red rose so fresh its petals still held dewdrops. My hand shaking, I opened the laptop. It came to life immediately. No password required. A video file was already queued up, the thumbnail showing Diego's face. I pressed play, my heart in my throat. Diego appeared on the screen, thinner than I remembered, his face gaunt, but his eyes still warm. The same eyes that had looked up at me with trust and love throughout his childhood. "Mom," he began, his voice steady, despite the visible effort it took. "If you're watching this, then I'm gone, and Gabriel has given you the keys to Aguila Vista." Tears welled in my eyes as I watched my son speak from beyond the grave. "I know you have questions. Why I kept this place from you. Why I made you promise never to come here." He paused, taking a deep breath. "I'm going to explain everything, but first I need to tell you something I've hidden for 3 years. Diego looked directly into the camera, as if he could see me sitting there, stunned and grieving. Mom, I have the same heart condition that took Dad. Dr. Stephen Morgan diagnosed me 3 years ago. He gave me 2 to 5 years to live. The world tilted beneath me. My son had been dying and I hadn't known. He'd carried this burden alone, smiling through family dinners, playing with Sophia, never once letting on that his heart was failing him. I didn't tell you or Elena, because I didn't want my last years to be defined by pity or fear. I wanted normalcy for as long as possible. For you, for Sophia. I paused the video, unable to bear more. Rising on unsteady legs, I moved to the window, pressing my forehead against the cool glass. How could I have missed it? Were there signs I should have seen? The weight of his secret crushed me, and I sobbed. Deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from the very core of my being. When I finally composed myself, I returned to the laptop and pressed play again. Diego's expression had changed. The warmth in his eyes was replaced by something harder. Determination, perhaps. Or warning. "Mom," he said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "There's something worse than knowing you're dying. I believe someone wants to speed up the process." I recoiled from the screen, my mind refusing to process what Diego had just said. Someone wanted my son dead. It was unthinkable. But the grave expression on his face left no room for doubt. Before Diego could continue, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel outside. Panic surged through me. Had I been followed after all? I quickly closed the laptop and moved to the window, staying partially hidden behind the curtain. A small blue car had pulled up beside mine. The driver's door opened, and to my shock, Sophia stepped out. My granddaughter looked around cautiously before approaching the house. I rushed to open the door. "Sophia, what are you doing here?" I asked, pulling her inside. She looked at me with those intelligent eyes that were so like her father's. "I followed you, Abuela. I saw you leave this morning and I borrowed Mom's car." She glanced away, then back at me. "You've been acting strange since Dad's funeral and I was worried." I guided her to the sofa, my mind racing. How much should I tell her? She was only 15, but she'd already lost her father. Did she deserve to know the truth? Or should I protect her? "This place belonged to your father," I said carefully. "He left it to me in his will." Sophia looked around, taking in the photographs, the well-appointed room. "Dad had a ranch. He never said anything." "I didn't know either," I admitted. "He kept it secret from all of us." Sophia's gaze fixed on the laptop. "What's that?" I hesitated. "Your father left some messages. I was just watching them." "I want to see," she said immediately, her voice breaking slightly. "Please, Abuela, I need to hear him." How could I refuse? She had as much right as I did to know her father's words. But the accusation of someone hastening his death, could I expose her to that? Before I could decide, the sound of multiple vehicles approaching echoed through the house. This time when I looked out the window, my blood ran cold. 3 luxury cars had pulled up. A black Mercedes leading 2 identical SUVs. Richard Blackwood stepped out of the Mercedes immaculate in an expensive suit despite the desert dust. Victoria emerged from the passenger side, her gray coat fluttering in the breeze. From one SUV, a man I didn't recognize appeared carrying a leather briefcase. "Sophia," I said urgently, "go to the back room and stay there until I call you." "But Abuela..." "Now, Sophia, please." She hesitated, then nodded, slipping away just as a commanding knock sounded at the door. Taking a deep breath, I opened it to face the Blackwoods. Richard didn't wait for an invitation. He strode in as if he owned the place, Victoria and the unknown man following. "Mrs. Mendoza," Richard said, his voice deep and authoritative. "We need to talk. This property doesn't belong to you." I straightened my spine, refusing to be intimidated in my son's home. "According to Diego's will, it does. Mr. Ortega was very clear." Victoria smiled coldly. "Wills can be contested, especially when the deceased wasn't in their right mind." "Diego was perfectly sane," I countered, anger rising in my chest. Richard gestured to the man with the briefcase. "This is Thomas Winters, our family attorney. He has documents showing that Aguila Vista Ranch was purchased with funds from a joint investment between Blackwood Enterprises and Diego. As such, it falls under marital assets to be inherited by Elena." Mr. Winters opened his briefcase, extracting several official-looking papers. "These contracts clearly show the financial arrangement," he said in a clipped tone. "Your son's will won't stand up in court." I glanced at the document, seeing complex legal language and signatures I couldn't verify as Diego's. "My lawyer will review these," I said firmly. Until then, I'm not going anywhere. Diego left Aguila Vista to me, not to Elena or Blackwood Enterprises. Richard's face hardened. You're making a mistake, Ava. A costly one. Is that a threat? I asked, meeting his gaze without flinching. It's advice, Victoria interjected, her voice smooth as silk but cold as ice. Legal battles are expensive and emotionally draining. Is that really how you want to spend your remaining years, fighting your son's wife and her family over property? The implication that at 64 my remaining years were few didn't escape me, but it was the mention of Diego's wife that made me pause. Where is Elena? I asked. If this is about her inheritance, why isn't she here herself? Richard and Victoria exchanged a quick glance. Elena is still grieving, Victoria said. We're handling matters for her until she's stronger. Something about their explanation rang false. If Elena truly believed this property should be hers, wouldn't she come herself? Before I could press further, Sophia emerged from the back room, her face flushed with anger. Grandpa Richard, she said, her voice shaking but determined. This ranch belonged to my dad. He wanted Abuela to have it, not you. Richard's expression softened slightly at the sight of his granddaughter, but his eyes remained calculating. Sophia, what are you doing here? Does your mother know where you are? No, Sophia admitted. But that doesn't change the facts. Dad left this place to Abuela. Victoria moved toward Sophia, arms outstretched as if to embrace her, but Sophia stepped back. Sweetheart, Victoria said, adult matters are complicated. Your father wasn't well toward the end. He wasn't thinking clearly. That's not true. Sophia's voice rose. Dad was fine until... She faltered, tears welling in her eyes. I put my arm around her shoulders, drawing her close. I think you should leave, I told the Blackwoods. My lawyer will contact yours. Until then, this property is legally mine. Richard's jaw tightened, but he nodded curtly. We'll go for now, but remember what I said, Ava. Never mess with things you don't understand. As they turned to leave, Richard paused at the door. And Sophia, your mother, will hear about this little unauthorized trip. The car will be reported stolen if you're not home within 2 hours. After they left, Sophia collapsed into my arms, sobbing. They're lying, Abuela. Dad wasn't confused. He knew exactly what he was doing. I held her close, my mind racing. What had Diego discovered that made him so determined to keep this property away from the Blackwoods? What was valuable enough for them to threaten and intimidate an old woman? As I comforted Sophia, I noticed something through the window. A figure standing by the stables, watching the Blackwoods' departure. A man in worn jeans and a cowboy hat, his weathered face unreadable from this distance. Who is that? I murmured. Sophia followed my gaze. I don't know, but he's been watching us since we arrived. Stay here, I told Sophia, moving toward the door. Abuela, wait. What if he's dangerous? If he meant us harm, he wouldn't be standing in plain sight. I reasoned, though my heart was pounding. Lock the door behind me. As I crossed the yard toward the stables, the stranger remained motionless, watching my approach with steady eyes. He was older than I'd first thought, perhaps in his early 60s, with deep lines etched into his sun-darkened face and salt and pepper hair visible beneath his worn cowboy hat. Ma'am, he greeted me, touching the brim of his hat. His voice was deep and gravelly, like stones rolling in a dry riverbed. Who are you? I asked, stopping at a safe distance. And what are you doing on this property? Name's Javier Rodriguez. I'm the ranch manager. He extended a calloused hand. Mr. Diego hired me 3 years ago when he first bought this place. I hesitated, then shook his hand. Ava Mendoza, Diego's mother. I know who you are, Mrs. Mendoza. Your son spoke of you often. A sad smile touched his lips. He said you were the strongest woman he'd ever known. Said you raised him alone after his father passed. The casual mention of details from Diego's life convinced me more than any ID could have. This man had indeed known my son. Why didn't Diego tell me about this ranch about you? I asked. Javier's eyes drifted to the departing dust cloud left by the Blackwoods' vehicles. Your son was a cautious man, Mrs. Mendoza. He had his reasons for secrecy. He paused. Those people who just left, the Blackwoods, they've been trying to get their hands on this land for years. Why, what's so special about Aguila Vista? Javier looked at me thoughtfully. That's something you should see for yourself, but not right now. He glanced at the house. Is that Diego's daughter with you? I nodded. Sophia. She followed me here. The Blackwoods threatened her, didn't they? said they'd report the car stolen if she doesn't return. You heard no, ma'am, but it's their style. Javier pulled out a set of keys from his pocket. I can drive her back in my truck, make sure she gets home safely. That'll give you time to look around without worrying about her. I studied him uncertain. Why should I trust you with my granddaughter? Javier pushed up his sleeve, revealing a long scar that ran from wrist to elbow. 5 years ago, I was in jail for a bar fight gone bad, looking at serious time. Your son was working on a water rights case that proved my innocence. He didn't just get me out of jail. He gave me this job when no one else would hire an ex-con with a record. I owe Diego Mendoza my life. His eyes held mine steadily. I would never harm his daughter. Something in his sincere expression convinced me. I nodded slowly. Let me talk to Sofia first. Inside, my granddaughter was resistant to the idea. I don't want to go back, abuela. Mom's been weird since Dad died, always whispering with Grandpa Richard, locking herself in the study for hours. I understand, Carino, but we can't give them a reason to call the police. That would only complicate things. I took her hands in mine. I promise I'll tell you everything I discover here. No secrets. Reluctantly, she agreed. Before leaving, she hugged me fiercely. Be careful, abuela. I don't trust them. I don't either, I admitted. That's why we have to be smart. After watching Javier's truck disappear down the driveway with Sofia, I returned to the main house, determined to continue where I'd left off with Diego's video. But when I opened the laptop again, I found it completely dead. The battery drained despite having been nearly full before the Blackwoods arrived. I searched for a charging cable but found none. Frustration welled up inside me. Had Richard or Victoria done something to the computer while I was distracted? With the video temporarily inaccessible, I decided to explore the ranch instead. The main house was spacious, but not ostentatious. 4 bedrooms, a well-appointed kitchen, the living room where we'd sat, and a small office filled with books on geology, water conservation, and sustainable agriculture. In Diego's desk, I found notebooks filled with his neat handwriting, plans for the ranch sketches for renewable energy systems, and calculations for crop yields. This wasn't just a hobby or an investment. My son had been building something meaningful here, but why keep it secret, and why specifically from me? As the afternoon light began to fade, I heard Javier's truck returning. I met him on the porch. Sofia get home okay? He nodded. Dropped her 2 blocks away like she asked. No one saw me. He hesitated. Mrs. Mendoza, now that she's safe, there's something you need to see. What is it? Diego's insurance policy, he said cryptically. Follow me. Javier led me away from the main house, past the stables where 6 beautiful horses watched us curiously, and toward an old barn at the edge of the property. Unlike the other buildings, this one appeared neglected, its wooden planks weathered and gray. He produced an old iron key and unlocked the heavy padlock on the door. Be careful with the steps, he warned as we entered. Inside the barn was dark and smelled of dust and old hay. Javier switched on a flashlight, revealing a dirt floor covered with scattered farm implements. He moved confidently to the back corner, knelt down and lifted what appeared to be an ordinary floorboard. Beneath it, a metal trapdoor gleamed dully in the flashlight beam. What is this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Diego called it his war room, Javier replied, opening the trapdoor to reveal a steep staircase descending into darkness. He knew that one day the Blackwoods would make their move. He prepared for it. I followed Javier down the stairs, clutching the railing tightly. At the bottom, he flipped a switch and fluorescent lights hummed to life, revealing a room that took my breath away. It wasn't just a basement. It was a fortress. Concrete walls reinforced with steel beams. A long table in the center was covered with files, external hard drives, and sophisticated computer equipment. On the walls hung detailed geological maps, satellite photos, and land surveys, all meticulously labeled and annotated. Diego built this 3 years ago, Javier explained. Right after he bought the property. Said he needed a place where the Blackwoods couldn't spy on him. I moved to the table, touching the files with trembling fingers. What was he hiding from? Not what Mrs. Mendoza, who? Javier picked up a thick folder and handed it to me. You should see this first. I opened the folder to find detailed geological surveys of Aguila Vista Ranch, pages of technical data core samples and chemical analyses. But what caught my eye was a section highlighted in yellow. Preliminary testing confirmed significant deposits of lithium, beryllium, and rare earth elements at depths accessible with current mining technology. Estimated value $3 to $5 billion at current market rates. My head spun. Billions. This peaceful ranch was sitting on a fortune in minerals essential for everything from electric vehicle batteries to smartphones and defense systems. Diego discovered this about 2 years ago, Javier said quietly. He was surveying the aquifer systems to improve our water conservation when he found unusual mineral concentrations. He sent samples for testing, swearing the lab to secrecy. The Blackwoods, I whispered. They know, don't they? They suspect. Richard Blackwood has been buying up land all around here for years, but Diego was careful. He registered the ranch under a separate LLC, kept his name off public records as much as possible. I set down the geology reports and moved to another file marked Blackwood Enterprises. Inside were newspaper clippings, corporate filings, and what appeared to be private investigator reports. Richard Blackwood has controlling interests in 3 mining companies, Javier explained. He's been positioning himself to dominate rare earth mining in the Southwest. Aguila Vista would be the crown jewel. My mind was reeling. This explained the Blackwoods' determination to take the ranch, but it didn't explain Diego's secrecy toward me or his dire warning in the video. Then I saw another folder, this one marked simply Evidence. With shaking hands, I opened it. Inside was a laboratory report on food samples accompanied by photographs of small white pills. The conclusion highlighted in red made my blood run cold. Food sample contains high-dose cardiac stimulant. In patients with existing heart conditions could potentially trigger fatal arrhythmia. Beneath this was a handwritten note in Diego's familiar script, found in my coffee. E prepares it every morning. Elena, my daughter-in-law, the mother of my granddaughter. The room seemed to tilt around me. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. No, I whispered. It can't be. Javier's weathered face was grim. Diego didn't want to believe it either, but the evidence kept piling up. The Blackwoods wanted this land and Diego refused to sell. He was the only thing standing in their way. Are you saying Elena poisoned my son that she... I couldn't finish the sentence. Diego believed someone was accelerating his heart condition, Javier said carefully. He started testing his food after he noticed his symptoms worsening faster than doctors predicted. I thought of Elena at the funeral sobbing dramatically, of Richard and Victoria taking charge, handling everything, of their insistence that Diego wasn't of sound mind. But why would she... Her own husband? The Blackwoods have been grooming Elena since she was a child, Javier said. Family legacy above all else. Richard has political ambitions beyond state senate. Victoria wants to be Arizona's most powerful woman. They need Blackwood Enterprises to expand, and that means controlling these mineral rights. I sank into a chair, overwhelmed. My son hadn't just died. He had been murdered. And not by strangers, but by the family he had married into. The family that was now raising his daughter. Sophia, my heart clenched with sudden fear. If they did this to Diego, what about Sophia? Is she in danger? Diego didn't think they'd harm her, Javier said. She's a Blackwood by blood. Their legacy. But what? If Sophia discovered what they did to her father, all bets are off. He handed me a small red USB drive. This contains everything. All the evidence Diego collected, including videos he recorded in his final months. He wanted you to have this if anything happened to him. As I took the drive, a loud electronic beep sounded from one of the computers. A red alert flashed on the screen. Remote access detected. Javier's face paled. He lunged forward, yanking power cords from the wall. The screens went dark. They know, he said urgently. They know we're down here. We need to leave. Now. We hurried up the stairs, Javier securing the trap door and replacing the floorboard. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of orange and purple. But the beauty was lost on me as we hurried back to the main house. What do I do now? I asked, clutching the USB drive like a lifeline. Javier's expression was grim but determined. Exactly what Diego planned for. You fight back. That night I couldn't sleep. The silence of Aguila Vista Ranch, once peaceful, now felt ominous. Every creak of the old hacienda made me start wondering if the Blackwoods had returned. The USB drive Javier had given me felt like a burning coal in my pocket, dangerous, but essential. At dawn I called Gabriel Ortega, keeping my voice low despite being alone in the house. Gabriel, I need you to come to Aguila Vista, today. My voice was steady, surprising me with its strength. Bring your laptop and whatever you need to build a legal case. This is bigger than a contested will. What's happened, Ava? Concern colored his tone. I can't explain over the phone. Just come, and make sure you're not followed. While waiting for Gabriel, I explored more of the ranch with Javier. The property spanned nearly 2,000 acres with natural springs feeding an ingenious water conservation system Diego had designed. Solar panels and a small wind farm provided electricity. There were greenhouses with experimental drought-resistant crops and a small laboratory where Diego had tested soil and water samples. He was creating something sustainable here, Javier explained as we walked among rows of native plants. A model for desert agriculture that wouldn't deplete the aquifer. The mineral deposits were an accidental discovery. But worth billions, I said quietly. Javier nodded. Which is why the Blackwoods want it. Their mining operations have a terrible environmental record. They'd strip this land bare. I stopped gazing across the ranch that Diego had loved enough to protect with his life. My son's vision had been so much larger than mere wealth. He'd been building a legacy of conservation and sustainability. They won't get it, I said, my voice hardening with resolve. I don't care how powerful they are. By midday, Gabriel arrived in his dust-covered sedan, looking anxious but determined. I led him and Javier to the main house where we gathered around the dining table. Before I show you what I've found, I said, I need to know that you're with me completely, Gabriel. This could get dangerous. Gabriel's eyes widened, but he nodded without hesitation. Diego was my best friend since high school. Whatever he was involved in, I'll help you. I connected the USB drive to Gabriel's laptop. For the next hour, we reviewed the evidence. Diego had compiled geological surveys confirming the mineral deposits, documentation of the Blackwoods' attempts to pressure Diego into selling, financial records showing how they'd leveraged themselves heavily in anticipation of acquiring the land, and most damning, the laboratory reports on the contaminated food. Gabriel's face grew increasingly grave. When we reached the videos Diego had recorded, his hands trembled as he clicked play. Diego appeared on screen, sitting in the underground bunker, looking thin but resolute. I'm recording these as insurance, he began. If you're watching, Mom, it means my suspicions were correct. Someone doesn't want to wait for nature to take its course with my heart. He detailed how he'd first become suspicious when his symptoms worsened dramatically after Elena returned from a weekend with her parents. How he began testing his food and found traces of prescription medications known to aggravate heart conditions. How he'd installed hidden cameras and caught Elena adding white powder to his coffee. I can't bring myself to confront her, Diego said, his voice breaking. Maybe I'm a coward, or maybe I still hope there's another explanation, but I've taken steps to protect what matters. Aguila Vista must never fall into Blackwood hands. The environmental damage would be incalculable, and the technological and defense applications of these minerals are too important to be controlled by people like Richard. Gabriel paused the video, his face ashen. This is... My God, Ava, this is murder. We need to go to the police. With what? I asked bitterly. Videos that could have been edited, food tests from months ago. The Blackwoods have friends in the Phoenix PD. Richard played golf with the commissioner last week. Then we use the courts, Gabriel said, determination hardening his features. Diego was meticulous. This evidence is compelling. We file for an emergency injunction to prevent any transfer of property. We bring a civil wrongful death suit. We create enough legal pressure that they make a mistake. They've already made one, Javier interjected. They accessed Diego's computer system remotely yesterday. That's traceable. Gabriel nodded, making notes. We'll need expert witnesses, computer forensics specialists, independent geologists to verify the mineral surveys, medical experts to review the toxicology findings. All of which costs money, I said, worry creeping into my voice. My teacher's pension wouldn't cover even a fraction of these legal expenses. Diego thought of that too, Javier said, pulling another folder from his jacket. There's an account set up in your name, $200,000. Emergency fund, he called it. I stared at the bank documents, fresh grief washing over me. Even dying Diego had been thinking ahead, protecting me. There's something else, Javier continued, more hesitant now. Diego wanted to make sure his daughter was safe too, if the worst happened. He handed me another envelope. Inside was a sealed letter addressed to Sophia, along with legal guardianship papers, already prepared, needing only signatures to transfer custody of Sophia from Elena to me in case of an emergency. He knew, I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. He knew they might kill him, and he still stayed with her. Why? Why not take Sophia and run? Because running would mean abandoning Aguila Vista, Gabriel said quietly. And Diego believed this land was worth fighting for, worth dying for. I closed my eyes, imagining my son's impossible choice, his life or his legacy. The weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders. Diego had entrusted me with both his vision and his daughter's safety. I couldn't fail him. We need a secure place to work, Gabriel said, glancing nervously at the windows. The Blackwoods probably have this place watched. Javier nodded. The war room. It's swept for bugs daily and the computers are on a closed network. We can set up operations there. For the next several hours, we strategized. Gabriel outlined the legal battle ahead, challenging the Blackwoods' claim to Aguila Vista, filing for emergency custody of Sophia based on concerns for her safety, preparing a wrongful death case against Elena and possibly her parents. We need to move quickly but carefully, Gabriel warned. The Blackwoods won't hesitate to use their influence. We need to gather more evidence before they realize what we have. I should talk to Sophia, they said. She might have seen something, noticed changes in Elena's behavior. Gabriel looked uncomfortable. That puts her in a difficult position, Ava, and potentially in danger if Elena suspects. She's already in danger, I insisted. She's living with the woman who killed her father. We need to be strategic about this, Javier advised. No direct accusations yet. We need to get Sophia away from them legally before anything else. As evening approached, Gabriel prepared to leave, taking copies of all the evidence with him. I'll file the injunction first thing tomorrow, he promised. And I'll start assembling our team. Stay here where it's safe, Ava. Let me handle the legal front for now. After he left, Javier showed me the ranch's security systems cameras monitoring the perimeter motion sensors on the main roads and a secure satellite phone that couldn't be easily tracked. Diego upgraded everything last year, he explained. Said it was just a precaution. I wandered back to the main house as darkness fell, exhaustion finally catching up with me. In Diego's bedroom, I found photos of Sophia at various ages. My beautiful granddaughter now caught in this nightmare without even knowing it. My phone rang, startling me. It was Isabella, my younger sister. Ava, where are you? I've been calling for days. Her voice was frantic with worry. I hesitated. Isabella and I had always been close, but Diego's warning about trusting no one echoed in my mind. I'm at Diego's property, I said carefully, the one he left me in his will. The ranch you went alone, Ava, that's not safe. The news said there's been break-ins in that area. I frowned. There had been no news reports about crime near Aguila Vista. The area was too remote to make local Phoenix news. I'm fine, I assured her, my guard rising. Just needed some time alone. Well, you shouldn't be alone right now, Isabella insisted. I'm coming to stay with you. Text me the address. No, I said quickly, too quickly. I mean, I'll be back in Phoenix tomorrow. We can talk then. There was a pause. Are you okay, Ava? You sound strange. Just tired, I replied. It's been a long day. After we hung up, I stared at the phone uneasily. Isabella had always been my rock, especially after Carlos died, but her insistence on coming to the ranch bothered me. How had she even known about this place? I decided to call her back tomorrow from Gabriel's office. Better to be cautious than sorry. That night I slept fitfully, dreaming of Diego trying to tell me something I couldn't quite hear. When morning came, I found Javier already in the kitchen making coffee. We have company coming, he said grimly, nodding toward the security monitors. A familiar blue car was approaching the gate. Sophia had returned. I rushed outside as Sophia's car pulled up to the house. My granddaughter emerged looking pale and determined, a small backpack clutched in her hands. Sophia, what are you doing back here? Your mother thinks I'm at a 2-day science retreat. She interrupted, her voice steady despite her obvious tension. I forged her signature on the permission slip. I needed to see you, Abuela. I ushered her inside, glancing nervously at the road beyond the gate. Had anyone followed her, the Blackwoods had been watching the ranch. They might be monitoring Sophia as well. Once inside, Sophia set her backpack on the table and fixed me with her father's piercing gaze. What's going on, Abuela? Why did Dad leave you this place, and why are Grandfather Richard and Grandmother Victoria so desperate to get it? I hesitated, torn between protecting her and telling the truth. She was only 15, but she had Diego's intelligence and perceptiveness. Keeping her in the dark might be more dangerous than trusting her. Your father discovered something valuable here, I began carefully. Something the Blackwoods want very badly. The minerals, she said, surprising me. When I stared at her, she continued. I overheard Mom and Grandfather talking. They mentioned rare earth deposits worth billions. That's what this is about, isn't it? I nodded slowly. Partly, but there's more, Sophia. Your father, he built something special here. A sustainable ranch that could serve as a model for desert agriculture. He didn't want the land stripped for mining. Sophia's eyes wandered to the photos on the wall, Diego with his horses working in the fields, standing proudly beside the windmills. He never told me about this place, she said softly. Why? I think he was trying to protect you. I said, choosing my words carefully. The less you knew, the safer you were. Her eyes narrowed. Safe from what, from who? Before I could answer, Javier entered carrying a tray of coffee and sweetbread. He nodded respectfully to Sophia. Your father spoke of you often, Miss Sophia. Said you had his curiosity and your grandmother's strength. Sophia studied him. You worked for my dad. Still do, Javier replied simply. This ranch doesn't run itself. Sophia turned back to me, her expression hardening. What aren't you telling me, Abuela? Yesterday Mom was on the phone all day with lawyers. She was crying, but when I walked in, she immediately stopped. When I asked what was wrong, she said she was just tired. Sophia, and Grandfather Richard came over last night. They locked themselves in the study for hours. I tried to listen through the door, but all I could hear was Aguila Vista and something about taking care of the problem permanently. What problem, Abuela, are they talking about you? The cold fear that had been my constant companion since discovering Diego's video intensified. Taking care of the problem permanently sounded ominously like a threat. I don't know, I admitted. But I think you should stay here for now until we figure things out. What about school? We'll sort that out. For now, I need you safe. Sophia's gaze drifted to Diego's laptop on the side table. What's on there? Did Dad leave you a message? I nodded, my throat tight. Yes, but it's complicated, Sophia. There are things your father discovered that are difficult to hear. About my mom, she asked quietly, her perceptiveness startling me again. When I didn't immediately answer, she continued. I've noticed things, Abuela. Mom's been different this past year. Secretive. Always whispering with Grandfather. And Dad? He started getting sicker after their anniversary trip to Sedona. He was fine before that. My heart broke for her. She had noticed more than I had realized. Your father thought someone might be making his condition worse, I said, choosing each word with painful care. Sophia's face drained of color. You mean hurting him on purpose? I reached for her hands, holding them tightly. We don't have all the answers yet, but we're looking for the truth, I promise you. Tears filled her eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. I want to help. Dad would want me to help. The best thing you can do is stay safe, I insisted. She shook her head stubbornly. No, I've been watching and listening for months, Abuela. I have things to tell you, things that might help. I exchanged glances with Javier, who gave a slight nod. Let her speak, Mrs. Mendoza. Diego always said his daughter noticed everything. Sophia opened her backpack and pulled out a small notebook with a well-worn cover. I started keeping track of Dad's good and bad days. At first, it was just because I was worried about him, but then I noticed a pattern. She flipped through the pages, pointing to dates and notes. See, Dad always got worse after Mom made his special tea. The one she said was good for his heart. My stomach clenched. Did you bring any of this tea? Sophia nodded, pulling out a small Ziploc bag containing dried herbs and what looked like crushed white tablets. I took it from the kitchen this morning. Mom keeps it in a special tin. We need to get this tested, Javier said quietly. There's more, Sophia continued, turning to another section of her notebook. 2 weeks before he died, I heard Mom and Grandfather arguing. He was saying they were running out of time and needed to accelerate the timeline. Mom was crying, saying there had to be another way. But Grandfather said, it's him or us, Elena. The business won't survive without those minerals. I felt the blood drain from my face. This was direct evidence of premeditation, exactly what we needed, but horrifying to hear from the mouth of a child about her own family. Sophia, what you're telling us, Do you understand what it means? I asked gently. She met my eyes, tears finally spilling over. That Mom and Grandfather killed Dad. For money. I pulled her into my arms as she began to sob, her thin shoulders shaking violently. For several minutes I just held her, my own tears falling into her dark hair. Javier quietly left the room, giving us privacy in our shared grief. I'm sorry, I whispered. I'm so sorry. Eventually her sobs quieted and she pulled back, wiping her eyes. What do we do now? We fight, I said, newfound determination in my voice. We protect what your father valued, and we make sure the truth comes out. But first we need to make sure you're legally safe. I showed her the guardianship papers Diego had prepared. Your father wanted me to take care of you if anything happened. Would that be okay with you? Sophia nodded immediately. I don't want to live with them anymore, Abuela. I can't. We'll need to do this properly through the courts, I explained. It won't be easy. The Blackwoods will fight us. I don't care, she said fiercely. I'll tell the judge everything I know, everything I wrote down. Her courage broke my heart and filled me with pride simultaneously. I stroked her hair gently. Your father would be so proud of you. But Sophia, this puts you in danger. If they realize what you know... I'll be careful, she promised. I can act normal when I go home tomorrow. They won't suspect anything. I wasn't convinced, but before I could argue further, Javier returned, his expression tense. We have a problem, he said. The security system just picked up 3 vehicles approaching from the main road. They're still 5 minutes out, but they're coming fast. I moved to the window. In the distance, a cloud of dust marked the approaching cars. It could be Gabriel, I said hopefully. Javier shook his head. He would have called first, and there are 3 vehicles. The Blackwoods had returned, and this time they might not be coming just to talk. Sophia, go with Javier to the war room, I instructed, my teacher's voice taking over calm but brooking no argument. Take your notebook and the tea. Stay there until I come for you. But Abuela, no arguments. Go now. As they hurried out the back door toward the barn, I grabbed my phone to call Gabrielle. No signal, not unusual in this remote location, but suspiciously convenient for the Blackwoods. I moved quickly through the house, gathering Diego's laptop and any obvious evidence. I hadn't seen any weapons on my exploration of the ranch, but I grabbed a heavy iron fireplace poker, better than nothing if things turned ugly. Through the window, I watched 3 black SUVs pull up to the house. From the first vehicle emerged Richard and Victoria Blackwood, impeccably dressed, despite the dust and heat. Thomas Winters, their lawyer, exited the second SUV with a document case under his arm. The third vehicle remained idling, its windows too darkly tinted to see inside. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door before they could knock, standing firmly in the entrance. I would not give them the satisfaction of invading Diego's home again. Mrs. Mendoza, Richard greeted, his voice falsely cordial. I see you've decided to stay despite our conversation yesterday. This is my property, Mr. Blackwood, I replied evenly. As Diego's will clearly states. Victoria's smile was cold. Actually, that's why we're here. The court has issued a temporary restraining order. You're to vacate these premises immediately. Thomas Winters stepped forward, extending a document. The judge has placed the property under conservatorship pending resolution of the will contest. Neither you nor Elena can occupy it until the matter is settled. I took the paper with steady hands, though my heart was racing. The document appeared legitimate, official court seals, a judge's signature. But something felt wrong. How had they obtained this so quickly without Gabriel being notified? My lawyer will need to review this, I said, not moving from the doorway. Richard's expression hardened. The order is effective immediately, Mrs. Mendoza. You have 30 minutes to collect your personal belongings and leave. Otherwise, we'll be forced to have you removed. His gaze shifted meaningfully to the third SUV, where 2 men in what looked like private security uniforms were now visible through the windshield. You're bluffing, I said, surprising myself with my boldness. No judge would issue this order without hearing from both parties. Gabriel would have been notified. Gabriel Ortega is currently dealing with a rather serious ethics complaint filed with the Arizona Bar Association this morning, Victoria said smoothly. Something about misappropriation of client funds. He's quite distracted. The calculated attack on Gabriel confirmed my suspicions. This was a coordinated effort to isolate me from any legal support. Now, Richard continued, you can leave peacefully, or we can make this difficult. Your choice. I stood my ground, mind racing. If I left, they would have access to the entire ranch, possibly discovering the war room and all the evidence it contained. If I refused, they might forcibly remove me, maybe even have me arrested for trespassing. Either way, Sophia would be vulnerable. Fine, I said, finally making a show of reluctance. I'll need time to pack my things. Victoria smiled triumphantly. Thomas will accompany you, to ensure nothing valuable disappears. I allowed Winters to follow me inside, mentally cataloging what I needed to secure before leaving. My phone, the USB drive, any notes I had made. But most importantly, I needed to warn Javier and Sophia without alerting the Blackwoods to their presence. I'll need to check the bedroom, I said, leading Winters through the house. Once there, I made a show of gathering clothing and toiletries while palming my phone. In the bathroom, I quickly texted Javier. Stay hidden. Court order forcing me to leave. We'll contact when safe. When I returned to the living room, Richard and Victoria had made themselves comfortable, Victoria examining the photographs on the wall with disdainful interest. Such a shame Diego wasted his talents on this experiment, she said, gesturing dismissively at images of the sustainable systems he had built. He could have been a significant asset to Blackwood Enterprises. My son had his own vision, I replied, unable to keep the pride from my voice. He didn't need to ride on someone else's success. Richard's expression darkened at the implied insult, but Victoria laid a restraining hand on his arm. 20 minutes left, Mrs. Mendoza, Winters reminded me coldly. I gathered my few belongings, moving deliberately slowly to give Javier and Sophia as much time as possible to secure themselves. As I prepared to leave, a new vehicle appeared in the driveway, a familiar blue sedan. My heart sank as Isabella emerged, looking worried and confused. Ava, she called, hurrying toward the house. There you are. I've been so worried. Isabella, I stepped onto the porch, genuinely surprised. How did you find me? You said you were at Diego's property. I asked around. Her voice trailed off as she noticed the Blackwoods behind me. What's going on here? Richard stepped forward smoothly. Family business, Ms. Mendoza. Your sister is just leaving. Isabella's gaze darted between us, uncertainty in her eyes. Leaving, but why, Ava? What's happening? I studied my sister carefully, wondering how she had really found Aguila Vista. The ranch wasn't on any public records under Diego's name, and it was too remote to simply ask around. Had she been in contact with the Blackwoods? They've obtained a court order, I explained cautiously, forcing me to leave until ownership is determined. Isabella's face registered shock, then anger. That's ridiculous. Diego left this place to you. I'm calling my friend at the Chronicle. Right now, this is exactly the kind of story they love. Wealthy family bullying a grieving mother. She reached for her phone, but Victoria stepped forward quickly. I wouldn't do that, Isabella, she said softly, her tone making the words sound like a threat. Legal matters can be so complicated, so easy for misunderstandings to occur. Isabella hesitated, her phone halfway to her ear. Something unspoken passed between her and Victoria, something that raised the hairs on the back of my neck. Isabella, I said carefully, could you drive me back to Phoenix? I don't think I should be alone right now. Relief flickered across her face. Of course, that's why I came. Let me help you with your bags. As we walked to her car, I glanced back at the house, my son's beloved project now in enemy hands. Richard stood watching us leave, his expression smugly triumphant. Victoria was already on her phone, perhaps calling Elena with news of their victory. The security guards from the third SUV had positioned themselves near the main house, looking more like soldiers securing territory than simple security. I prayed Javier and Sophia remained safely hidden in the war room. In Isabella's car, driving away from Aguila Vista, I maintained casual conversation while my mind raced with questions. How had my sister known where to find me? Why had she appeared just as the Blackwoods were forcing me out? And what was the meaning of that exchange with Victoria? Richard Blackwood has some nerve, Isabella said, gripping the steering wheel tightly, using his influence to get emergency court orders. It's disgusting. How did you know about the court order? I asked, trying to sound casual. I didn't mention that on the phone. Isabella faltered momentarily. Oh, I overheard them talking about it when I arrived. A plausible explanation, but something didn't ring true. I'd been standing on the porch when she arrived, and the Blackwoods had been inside with me. What do you know about the Blackwoods, Isabella? I pressed. You move in some of the same social circles, don't you? Hardly, she scoffed. I'm just a community college administrator. The Blackwoods are Phoenix royalty, though I did attend a charity gala Victoria hosted last year. Just as a +1, she added quickly. What was your impression of them? She shrugged. Typical wealthy power couple. Richard's ambitious, Victoria's calculating. Elena always seemed the odd one out, softer, more genuine. I nearly laughed at the description of Elena as genuine. If only Isabella knew what evidence we'd uncovered. They seem very determined to get Aguila Vista, I observed. Well, it is valuable property, Isabella replied. Desert real estate with water rights is always a good investment. I raised an eyebrow. How do you know it has water rights? Another momentary hesitation. Just assuming. Most ranch properties do, don't they? My suspicions deepened. Isabella knew more about Aguila Vista than she was letting on. Where are we going exactly? I asked, noticing we weren't heading toward my house in Phoenix. I thought you could stay with me for a few days, Isabella said. It's not safe for you to be alone right now with everything that's happening. I appreciate that, but I need to meet with Gabriel. The court order may not be legitimate. Isabella's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. Gabriel's been suspended by the Bar Association, Ava. It was on the news this morning. Some ethics violation. He can't help you right now. So the Blackwoods' claim about Gabriel facing an ethics complaint was true. They were systematically cutting off my support. Then I need to find another lawyer, I insisted. I'd like you to drop me at the law offices downtown. Ava, be reasonable, Isabella said, her voice taking on a persuasive tone I knew well from childhood. You're exhausted and upset. Legal matters can wait until tomorrow. No, they can't, I said firmly. Drop me downtown or I'll call a taxi. Isabella sighed dramatically, but made the turn toward downtown Phoenix. You're being paranoid, you know. The Blackwoods are just protecting their family interests. They're not villains in some conspiracy theory. I studied my sister's profile, the sister I'd grown up with, shared secrets with, mourned with when my husband died. The sister who had always been there for me until now when her loyalties seemed divided. How well do you really know the Blackwoods, Isabella? I asked directly. She glanced at me, then quickly back at the road. I told you I barely know them. Then why did Victoria speak to you as if you were familiar? And why did you show up at exactly the moment they were forcing me out? Isabella's jaw tightened. What are you implying, Ava? I'm asking direct questions, not implying anything. She pulled the car to the curb abruptly, still several blocks from the downtown law offices. You're upset and not thinking clearly. I came because I was worried about you, my own sister. And this is the thanks I get, accusations and suspicion. I never accused you of anything, I said calmly. But you didn't answer my questions. Isabella turned to face me, anger and something like fear flashing in her eyes. Fine. I've met with Victoria Blackwood a few times. Professional networking. She's on the board at the community college. She mentioned they were concerned about you alone at that remote ranch, possibly in an unstable state of mind after Diego's death. She asked if I could help convince you to come back to Phoenix. That's all. It was a plausible explanation, but it didn't account for how she'd found Aguila Vista or why she'd appeared precisely when the Blackwoods were there. And how did you find the ranch? I pressed. Her eyes slid away from mine. Elena told me. She was worried about you too. Another lie. Elena hadn't known I was at the ranch until the Blackwoods confronted me there. I see, I said, reaching for the door handle. Thank you for the ride, Isabella. I can find my way from here. Ava, don't be ridiculous. We're miles from downtown in this heat. Get back in the car. I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw the desperation behind her anger. She needed me to go with her, not to the law offices, not to my home, but somewhere else. Somewhere controlled. Goodbye, Isabella, I said firmly, stepping out of the car. I'll call you tomorrow. As I walked away, she called after me. You're making a terrible mistake, Ava. The Blackwoods are powerful people. You can't win against them. I didn't look back, just kept walking, my heart breaking with the realization that my own sister had been compromised by the Blackwoods' influence. First my son, then my granddaughter, and now my sister, the Blackwoods, were systematically destroying my family. But they had underestimated one thing, the strength of a mother who had nothing left to lose. I didn't go to the downtown law offices. Instead, I ducked into a shopping mall, watching carefully to ensure Isabella wasn't following me. Inside, I found a quiet corner in a coffee shop and tried calling Gabriel. The call went straight to voicemail. Gabriel, it's Ava. The Blackwoods came to the ranch with a court order forcing me to leave. They said you're facing an ethics complaint. Call me when you can. Next, I tried Javier's satellite phone. After several rings, he answered, his voice tense. "Mrs. Mendoza, are you safe?" "Yes," I assured him. "I'm in Phoenix. What's happening there?" "They're searching the ranch," he reported grimly. "Security guards at all the buildings. Sophia and I are still in the war room. They haven't found the entrance yet, but they're being thorough." "Is Sophia all right?" "Scared but holding up. Smart kid. She suggested we move some of the evidence to a different location in case they find us." Pride swelled in my chest. "Good thinking. Listen, Javier, we need a backup plan. If they discover you—" "There's a back exit," he interrupted. "Diego built an escape tunnel leading to the canyon edge. There's an old Jeep hidden there. If we need to run, we can." "Good. Stay hidden as long as possible. I'm going to find legal help." After ending the call, I used the coffee shop's Wi-Fi to search for information about Gabriel's alleged ethics violation. Sure enough, there was a brief news item about Gabriel Ortega being temporarily suspended pending investigation of client fund misappropriation. The complaint had been filed anonymously. The Blackwoods were powerful indeed, able to manipulate the legal system with such ease, but their very efficiency betrayed their desperation. They wouldn't go to such lengths unless they were truly afraid of what Diego had discovered. I needed allies, people beyond the Blackwoods' influence. After some thought, I took a taxi to the offices of the Phoenix Chronicle, asking for Martina Vasquez, an investigative reporter who had once interviewed me for a story about education funding. She had impressed me with her integrity and thoroughness. Mrs. Mendoza, Martina looked surprised when her assistant showed me into her cluttered office. "What brings you here?" "I have a story you might be interested in," I said, closing the door behind me. "About the Blackwood family mineral rights worth billions and possibly murder." Martina's eyebrows rose, but she gestured for me to continue without comment. For the next hour, I outlined the situation, careful to distinguish between what we could prove and what we suspected. I didn't mention Sophia's location or the war room, just in case the Blackwoods had connections at the newspaper, too. When I finished, Martina leaned back in her chair, expression thoughtful. "That's one hell of a story, Mrs. Mendoza. But going against the Blackwoods is dangerous. They own half the judges in Maricopa County and have friends in the governor's office." "I know," I acknowledged. "But the truth needs to come out. My son didn't die of natural causes, Ms. Vasquez. He was murdered for what he discovered at Aguila Vista. Do you have evidence of this? Something concrete I could take to my editor?" I hesitated. The USB drive was secure in my pocket, but sharing its contents prematurely might put Sophia at risk if the Blackwoods discovered we were working with the press. "I have some," I said carefully, "but not everything is in my possession yet. I need time to build the case properly." Martina nodded, understanding my caution. "Here's what I can do. I'll start background research on the Blackwoods' mining interests and land acquisitions. Quietly. And I can put you in touch with Patricia Delgado. She's the best defense attorney in Phoenix and completely independent. The Blackwoods tried to hire her once and she turned them down on principle." "That would be helpful," I said gratefully. "But Mrs. Mendoza," Martina added seriously, "you need a safe place to stay. The Blackwoods have eyes everywhere. If what you're saying is true, they won't hesitate to silence you too." The blunt assessment sent a chill through me. Until that moment, I hadn't fully processed that my own life might be in danger. "I hadn't thought about that," I admitted. "My cousin owns a small apartment complex in Tempe," Martina offered. "Very private, mostly students. I could arrange for you to use a vacant unit, no paperwork. The Blackwoods wouldn't think to look for you there." I accepted gratefully, and by evening I was settled in a small but clean studio apartment near Arizona State University, surrounded by young students who paid no attention to a gray-haired woman in their midst. Patricia Delgado agreed to meet me the next morning. She arrived precisely at 9 a.m., a formidable woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner. "Martina briefed me," she said without preamble. "You've stepped into a hornet's nest, Mrs. Mendoza." "Not by choice," I replied. "But I won't back down. My son deserves justice." Patricia's expression softened slightly. "Yes, he does. Let me see what we're working with." I showed her the court order the Blackwoods had presented, which she immediately identified as problematic. "This isn't right," she said, frowning at the document. "Judge Harmon wouldn't issue this type of ex parte order without compelling evidence of imminent harm to the property, and even then, both parties would need to be notified." "So it's not legitimate?" "It's technically valid, that's Harmon's signature, but procedurally irregular. The Blackwoods must have significant influence over him to get this pushed through. She set the paper aside. What other evidence do you have? I connected the USB drive to her laptop, showing her Diego's videos and the documentation he had compiled. Patricia watched with growing concern, taking detailed notes. This is compelling, she admitted when we finished, especially the toxicology reports. But we need more to connect Elena directly to the poisoning. The videos show your son's suspicions, but not definitive proof of her actions. My granddaughter has been keeping a journal, I said, noting when her father's condition worsened, correlating it with her mother's special tea. She even took a sample of the tea, which contains what looks like crushed medication. Patricia's eyes widened. Where is your granddaughter now? Safe, I said, not elaborating, but still legally in her mother's custody. That needs to change immediately, Patricia said firmly. I'll file for emergency temporary guardianship today. With the evidence of potential poisoning and Sophia's own testimony, we have grounds for immediate removal from the home. The Blackwoods will fight it, I warned. Let them, Patricia said with fierce determination. I've been wanting to take them down a peg for years. No one is above the law, not even Richard Blackwood. For the first time since discovering Diego's secret, I felt a flicker of hope. In Patricia Delgado, I had found someone who wasn't intimidated by the Blackwoods' power and influence. Throughout the day, Patricia worked tirelessly filing motions to invalidate the ranch eviction, secure temporary guardianship of Sophia, and freeze any transfer of Aguila Vista's ownership pending investigation. By late afternoon, she had secured a hearing for the following morning before Judge Maria Gonzalez. Gonzalez is good, Patricia assured me. Fair, independent, and impossible to bribe. The Blackwoods won't be able to manipulate her. That evening, I received a text from an unknown number, security found tunnel, moving to backup location. Will contact when secure. S is safe. Javier and Sophia had escaped just in time. Relief flooded through me, followed by renewed determination. Tomorrow would be our first real confrontation with the Blackwoods in court. We needed to be prepared for anything. I tried calling Isabella, still holding on to a thread of hope that my sister's involvement with the Blackwoods was innocent. But when her voicemail answered, I didn't leave a message. Trust once broken was difficult to repair. Sleep eluded me that night. I kept seeing Diego's face in my mind, imagining his final days, suspecting his wife was poisoning him, but staying to protect his vision for Aguila Vista. The weight of his sacrifice pressed down on me like a physical burden. I couldn't fail him. I wouldn't. Morning arrived with a sense of impending battle. Patricia picked me up early, briefing me on what to expect in court. The Blackwoods will have their entire legal team there, she warned. They'll try to paint you as an unstable, grieving mother, making wild accusations. Stay calm, stick to the facts, and let me handle the legal maneuvering. As we approached the courthouse, I saw news vans parked outside. Martina had kept her word, the story was beginning to break. Inside the courtroom was already filling with spectators and reporters. At the front, Thomas Winters sat with a team of 3 additional lawyers. Richard and Victoria Blackwood occupied the seats directly behind them, both immaculately dressed and projecting confidence. Elena sat beside them wearing a modest black dress, her eyes downcast in a perfect picture of grieving widowhood. The sight of her, knowing what she had done to Diego, made my blood boil, but I maintained my composure as Patricia and I took our seats. Then I saw Isabella entering the courtroom looking nervous. When our eyes met, she quickly looked away, moving to sit several rows behind the Blackwoods. The final betrayal cut deep, but I forced myself to focus on the task ahead. Judge Gonzalez entered a stern-looking woman with silver-streaked black hair, pulled back in a severe bun. She surveyed the crowded courtroom with evident displeasure. "This is a preliminary hearing, not a circus," she announced. "Ms. Delgado, you filed multiple emergency motions. Let's address them in order of urgency." Patricia stood. "Your Honor, our most pressing concern is the welfare of Sofia Mendoza, a minor currently in the custody of her mother, Elena Blackwood Mendoza. We have evidence suggesting the environment is unsafe for the child." Winters rose immediately. "Objection, Your Honor. These are baseless accusations from a grieving mother-in-law who is unhappy with the natural inheritance process." Judge Gonzalez silenced him with a look. "Save your objections, Mr. Winters. Ms. Delgado, what evidence supports your motion for emergency guardianship?" Patricia presented the evidence methodically. Diego's video testimony about suspecting poisoning the toxicology reports on his food, and most damning Sophia's journal documenting the correlation between her mother's special tea and her father's worsening condition. Furthermore, Patricia continued, we have reason to believe Sophia herself may be in danger for what she has witnessed. She has expressed fear of returning to her mother's home. Winters countered with accusations that I had manipulated Sophia, turning her against her mother during a vulnerable time. Elena dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, playing the part of the wounded mother perfectly. As the arguments continued, the courtroom door opened quietly, and two figures slipped in, Javier and Sophia. My granddaughter looked pale but determined as she moved toward our table, ignoring Elena's gasp of surprise. Your Honor, Sophia said clearly, approaching the bench, despite the bailiff's attempt to stop her. I need to speak. This is about my life. Judge Gonzalez studied her for a moment, then nodded. Approach the bench, young lady. Counsel for both sides as well. As Patricia and Winters joined Sophia before the judge, I watched Elena's face. The mask of grieving widow had slipped, replaced by calculation, and something that looked very much like fear. She leaned over to whisper urgently to Richard, who shook his head sharply, his expression thunderous. After a brief conference, Judge Gonzalez announced, the court will hear testimony from Sofia Mendoza in chambers with counsel present, but not family members. We'll recess for 30 minutes. As they left the courtroom, Elena suddenly stood. Sophia, she called, her voice breaking. Baby, what are they telling you? You know I love you. Sophia paused, looking back at her mother with eyes far older than her 15 years. Did you love Dad too? She asked quietly before continuing toward the judge's chambers. The question hung in the air like a thunderclap. Elena sank back into her seat, color draining from her face. In that moment, watching my granddaughter's straight back as she walked away, I knew we had a fighting chance. The truth was powerful, and Sophia was brave enough to speak it. The next 30 minutes were the longest of my life. Richard and Victoria conferred intensely with their legal team. Elena sat alone, seemingly abandoned by her parents in her moment of crisis. Isabella kept glancing at me, conflict evident on her face. When Judge Gonzalez returned, her expression was grave. Based on the testimony I've heard and the evidence presented, I am granting temporary emergency guardianship of Sofia Mendoza to her grandmother Eva Mendoza, effective immediately. She raised her hand as Winters began to object. This is a temporary measure pending full investigation of the allegations, which I find sufficiently credible to warrant immediate action to protect the minor. Elena let out a cry of protest, quickly silenced by Victoria's hand on her arm. Additionally, Judge Gonzalez continued, I am invalidating the property order issued by Judge Harmon regarding Aguila Vista Ranch. The procedural irregularities are concerning enough that I'm referring the matter to the Judicial Ethics Committee. Until ownership is legally determined, neither party shall occupy the property, which will be secured by court-appointed officers, not private security. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was enough for now. Sophia would be safe with me, and the Blackwoods would be removed from Aguila Vista, preserving whatever evidence remained in the war room. As we left the courtroom, reporters shouted questions. Patricia guided me through the crowd, Sophia's hand firmly in mine. Behind us, I could hear Richard Blackwood making a statement, his voice confident as he dismissed the proceedings as a temporary setback based on a child's misunderstanding and a grandmother's manipulation. Outside in the bright Arizona sunshine, Sophia finally allowed herself to cry, clinging to me, as if I were her only anchor in a storm. I held her close, whispering reassurances, though I knew our battle was far from over. The Blackwoods had lost this round, but they would regroup and attack again. They had too much at stake to surrender now. And somewhere in the background, Isabella was still a wild card, my sister, who had somehow been drawn into the Blackwoods' web of influence and deception. As we drove away from the courthouse, I glanced back to see Richard Blackwood watching us, his expression cold and calculating. This was just the beginning of our war. The safe house Patricia arranged for us was a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood in Tempe. Nothing fancy, but secure, with a doorman who had been instructed to screen all visitors, and a location known only to Patricia and Javier. That first evening, Sophia sat cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by her father's files. Despite her exhaustion, she was determined to help organize the evidence for our case. I watched her from the kitchen as I prepared a simple dinner, marveling at her resilience. At 15, she was facing horrors no child should have to confront, yet she remained focused and brave. Abuela, she called, holding up a stack of papers. I found something weird. Dad was tracking Mom's phone calls for the past year. I joined her, examining the detailed logs Diego had compiled. Dozens of calls between Elena and her father, often late at night or early morning times when Diego would have been asleep or out of the house. There are so many, Sophia murmured, flipping through the pages. And look, these highlighted ones happened right before Dad had his worst episodes. A pattern emerged, calls from Richard to Elena, followed within hours by Diego experiencing severe heart symptoms. The correlation was too consistent to be coincidental. They were coordinating, I said quietly, the reality of the conspiracy hitting me anew. Your grandfather telling your mother when to administer the medication. Sophia's hand trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady. There's more. Dad tracked the calls to specific locations. She pointed to notations beside several entries. This one says Lake House meeting, and this one RE warehouse discussion. RE real estate, I guessed. Rare earth, Javier corrected, entering from the balcony where he'd been keeping watch. The Blackwoods own a processing facility for rare earth minerals near Tucson. It's where they'd likely process anything mined from Aguila Vista. Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The Blackwoods hadn't just wanted the land for its mineral rights. They already had the infrastructure to exploit it immediately. The doorbell rang, startling us all. Javier moved instantly to the security monitor near the door. It's Patricia, he confirmed, buzzing her in. Our lawyer entered, looking both exhausted and energized, the paradoxical state of someone who's been working intensely on something they're passionate about. We have developments, she announced, setting her briefcase on the coffee table. Good and concerning. The good first, I suggested, noticing Sophia's tense expression. Patricia nodded. The court has scheduled an expedited hearing for the wrongful death case. Judge Gonzalez wants this resolved quickly, especially with the custody implications for Sophia. And the concerning, I asked. The Blackwoods have filed a countersuit claiming defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress. They're asking for $5 million in damages. She paused. And they've moved to have all of Diego's evidence excluded, claiming it was obtained illegally. That's ridiculous, I protested. It was his own home, his own wife. Arizona has complicated privacy laws, Patricia explained. They're arguing that recording Elena without consent violated wiretapping statutes, and that the food testing was done without chain of custody protocols. Sophia spoke up, her voice surprisingly calm. But they can't exclude my journal right or my testimony. I'm a direct witness. Patricia gave her an approving look. Exactly. You're our ace, Sophia. The Blackwoods can attack the technical evidence, but they can't easily discredit a child's first-hand observations of her parents. She turned back to me. Which is why they've launched a different attack. They've filed a motion suggesting you've unduly influenced Sophia, turning her against her mother during a time of grief. I felt a surge of anger. That's predictable, Patricia interrupted gently. And we anticipated it. Which is why I've arranged for Sophia to meet with Dr. Lillian Chen tomorrow. She's the state's most respected adolescent psychologist and an expert witness in family court cases. Another evaluation, Sophia sighed. A friendly one, Patricia assured her. Dr. Chen understands the situation. She'll provide an independent assessment that you're speaking of your own volition, not under manipulation. As Patricia continued outlining our legal strategy, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. We need to talk, not what you think. Meet me tomorrow 10 a.m., Desert Botanical Garden. Come alone. Isabella. My sister was reaching out, but could I trust her after seeing her with the Blackwoods? The Botanical Garden was public enough to be safe, but isolated enough for a private conversation. I showed the message to Patricia after Sophia had gone to bed. It could be a trap, she warned. The Blackwoods might be using your sister to get to you. Or she might have information we need, I countered. Isabella has known Elena for years. She might know something important. Patricia considered this. Take Javier with you. He can maintain distance but be close enough to intervene if necessary. The next morning, leaving Sophia in Patricia's care, Javier and I arrived at the Desert Botanical Garden 30 minutes early. The spring blooms created a vibrant backdrop against the desert landscape as families and tourists wandered the paths. Javier positioned himself at the cactus exhibition, close enough to observe but not obviously connected to me. At precisely 10 a.m., Isabella appeared wearing large sunglasses and a wide-brimmed hat, clearly trying to avoid recognition. She sat beside me on a bench partially screened by Palo Verde trees. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice low. "I don't have much time." Why are you helping the Blackwoods, Isabella? I asked directly. She flinched. It's complicated, Ava. Richard Blackwood helped me when I was in trouble 3 years ago. Financial trouble, gambling debts. She looked away, shame evident in her posture. He paid them off, kept it quiet so I wouldn't lose my job at the college. In return, I've provided information about people he's interested in, including me, your own sister. At first, just general updates, how you were doing after Carlos died. Then when Diego married Elena, Richard became more interested in your family. She twisted her hands in her lap. When Diego died, Richard asked me to watch you closely, to report if you discovered anything unusual, like Aguila Vista, I said flatly. She nodded. I didn't know what it meant, Ava. I swear. I thought Richard was just protecting family investments. Until when? I pressed. When did you realize something darker was happening? Isabella took a shaky breath. 2 days ago, I overheard Victoria on the phone with someone at their house. She said if the old woman has seen the videos, she'll have to be dealt with like her son. Isabella's voice broke. That's when I knew. They did something to Diego, and they might do the same to you. I studied my sister, looking for signs of deception. Her distress seemed genuine, her fear palpable. Why should I believe you now? I asked. You could be setting me up. Because I brought you this, she said, sliding a small voice recorder from her purse. Yesterday after the court hearing, I was at the Blackwoods' house. Elena was hysterical. Victoria was trying to calm her down, and I recorded their conversation. She pressed play, and Victoria's cold, precise voice emerged from the device. Pull yourself together, Elena. The situation is manageable. Manageable? Elena's voice was shrill with panic. Sophia knows Mother. She kept that journal for months. She has the tea. The tea proves nothing without context. It could be any herbal remedy. But the timing, she documented every time I gave it to him. And she told the judge everything. Calm down. Even if she suspects, suspicion isn't proof. The medication is untraceable after 72 hours. There's no evidence in Diego's system now. What about the videos, the food samples he sent for testing? Inadmissible. Obtained without proper procedure. Richard has already arranged it with Judge Harmon. A pause. Then Elena's voice again, quieter but clearer. I never wanted to kill him, Mother. You and Dad said the doses were just to make him sick enough to agree to sell Aguila Vista. You promised it wouldn't be enough to... What's done is done. The important thing now is protecting the family legacy. Sophia is young. She'll forget eventually, especially once she inherits her share of Blackwood Enterprises. The recording ended. Isabella looked at me, her eyes wide behind her sunglasses. I brought a copy for you, she said, handing me a flash drive. The original is somewhere safe in case something happens to me. I've betrayed them, Ava. They don't forgive betrayal. I took the flash drive, my hand steady despite the shock of hearing such direct evidence of Diego's murder. You need to testify, I said. This recording combined with your testimony about what you've seen and heard. I can't, she interrupted, fear evident in her voice. Richard would destroy me. He has evidence of my gambling, forged documents with my signature. He could send me to prison. Isabella, they killed my son, your nephew. They murdered Diego for money and power. Are you really going to protect them? She looked away, conflict written across her face. I'll think about it. That's all I can promise right now. She stood abruptly. I have to go. They think I'm at a doctor's appointment. Isabella, be careful, Ava. The Blackwoods don't just have money and influence. They have people willing to do their dirty work. Watch your back. With that, she hurried away, leaving me with the flash drive and a tumultuous mix of emotions. When I rejoined Javier and shared the recording, his expression darkened. This is the smoking gun we needed, he said. Elena's confession, Victoria's involvement. This proves conspiracy. But is it admissible? I wondered. Isabella recorded them without consent. Arizona is a one-party consent state for recordings, Javier reminded me. Isabella was part of the conversation, so it's legal. But convincing her to testify might be another matter. Back at the safe house, Patricia listened to the recording with growing excitement. This changes everything, she declared. A direct confession from Elena and Victoria as an accessory. With this, I can subpoena their phone records to match with Diego's logs, get a warrant for the tea ingredients, maybe even access communications between Richard and the mining companies he's been negotiating with. Sophia, who had returned from her meeting with Dr. Chen, listened to the recording with a stoic expression that broke my heart. Hearing her mother explicitly admit to poisoning her father, even with the qualification that she hadn't meant to kill him, was a devastating final confirmation of her worst fears. "Mom really did it," she whispered, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "She really killed Dad." I wrapped my arms around her, feeling her slim shoulders shake with silent sobs. "I'm so sorry, Carino. So very sorry." When she finally pulled away, wiping her tears, a new determination had settled in her eyes. "We're going to make them pay, right, all of them, for what they did to Dad." "Justice, not vengeance," I reminded her gently. "Your father wouldn't want you consumed by hatred." "The best revenge will be preserving Diego's legacy at Aguila Vista," Javier added. "Protecting what he built instead of letting them destroy it." Sophia nodded slowly. "I want to go back there when this is over. I want to see everything he created." "We will," I promised. "Together." The next week passed in a whirlwind of legal proceedings. Patricia worked tirelessly using Isabella's recording to secure subpoenas and search warrants. The Blackwoods fought back with their team of attorneys, but Judge Gonzalez remained unmoved by their increasingly desperate procedural objections. Phone records confirmed the pattern Diego had documented calls from Richard to Elena preceding Diego's worst health episodes. Analysis of Elena's special tea revealed a potent cardiac stimulant mixed with herbs known to mask its bitter taste. Elena's credit card statements showed purchases of prescription medications from an online pharmacy using a false name, but delivered to her office address. The evidence was mounting, but the Blackwoods remained defiant. In public statements, Richard dismissed the accusations as a vindictive campaign by a disturbed grandmother, while Victoria stood silently beside him, her face a mask of dignified suffering. Elena avoided public appearances entirely, reportedly under medical care for extreme emotional distress. Then, 3 days before the final hearing, Isabella disappeared. My calls went unanswered. Her apartment showed no signs of struggle, but her passport and some clothing were missing. Had she fled out of fear, or had the Blackwoods discovered her betrayal and taken more drastic measures? "This complicates things," Patricia admitted when I called her with the news. "Without Isabella to authenticate the recording and testify about her conversations with the Blackwoods, our case is weaker." "But we still have the recording itself, and all the evidence it led to," I insisted. "Yes, but defense will challenge its provenance. They'll claim it's doctored or taken out of context." She sighed heavily. "We need to prepare for a harder fight." That evening, as Sophia and I were preparing dinner, a breaking news alert appeared on the kitchen television. The reporter stood outside the Blackwood estate, her expression grave. "Shocking developments in the Blackwood family saga today, as Victoria Blackwood, wife of former state senator Richard Blackwood, was found unresponsive in their Paradise Valley home. Sources close to the family indicate a possible suicide attempt, though no official statement has been released. Mrs. Blackwood has been transported to Phoenix Memorial Hospital, where she remains in critical condition." Sophia and I stared at each other in stunned silence. Was it really a suicide attempt or something more sinister? Was Richard eliminating liabilities, starting with his own wife Patricia, called minutes later? "I've heard from contacts at the hospital," she said without preamble. "Victoria left a note. They're keeping the contents confidential, but my source says it reads like a confession." "Of Diego's murder?" I asked, hope flaring. "Unclear. But the police are involved now, not just hospital staff. That suggests something beyond a personal tragedy." She paused. "This could work in our favor, or against us. If Victoria implicated others, particularly Richard or Elena, they'll be desperate. Desperate people make mistakes, or desperate people become more dangerous." I countered, thinking of Isabella's disappearance with new concern. "I've arranged additional security for all of us," Patricia assured me. "The hearing is in 3 days. We stay vigilant until then." Late that night, unable to sleep, I sat on the apartment balcony, gazing at the distant mountains silhouetted against the star-filled Arizona sky. Diego had loved those mountains, had taken hiking trips into their rugged terrain since he was a boy. My phone buzzed with a text from another unknown number. "Southwest Airlines Flight 1353 arriving Phoenix, 8:15 a.m. tomorrow. Important witness. Trust me." G. Gabriel Ortega. I had almost forgotten about him in the chaos of recent events. Apparently, he had been working behind the scenes, despite the ethics complaint that had temporarily sidelined him. I forwarded the message to Patricia, who responded immediately. "I'll be there. Bring Javier for security." The next morning, Javier and I waited anxiously at the airport arrivals area while Patricia parked the car. Passengers from Flight 1453 began streaming into the terminal: business travelers, tourists, families. Then I saw them Gabriel Ortega looking tired but triumphant, accompanied by a thin, nervous man in his 50s whom I didn't recognize. "Ava," Gabriel greeted me with a quick hug. "This is Dr. Stephen Morgan, Diego's cardiologist." Dr. Morgan extended his hand. "Mrs. Mendoza, I'm so sorry about your son." "Dr. Morgan has been in hiding," Gabriel explained as we walked quickly to Patricia's waiting car. "The Blackwoods threatened his family when he started asking questions about Diego's deteriorating condition." "I noticed anomalies in Diego's cardiac readings," Dr. Morgan explained once we were safely in the car. "Patterns inconsistent with the natural progression of his condition. When I expressed concern, Diego confided his suspicions about being poisoned." "You knew?" I asked, a hint of accusation in my voice. "Why didn't you report it?" "I did," he said grimly. "To the medical board and the police. But the detective assigned to look into it was a golfing buddy of Richard Blackwood. The investigation was closed within days for lack of evidence." "And then the threats started," Gabriel added. "Dr. Morgan's car vandalized his children followed to school. He sent his family to stay with relatives and was preparing to document everything when Diego died." Dr. Morgan finished, grief evident in his voice. "I should have done more, been more insistent. Maybe if I had—" "You did what you could," I assured him, though part of me wanted to blame him for not saving my son. "What matters now is that you're here to testify." Patricia, who had been listening intently, spoke up. "Dr. Morgan, can you definitively state that Diego's death was not due to natural causes?" "Without question," he confirmed. "I reviewed his final medical reports. The specific pattern of cardiac failure is consistent with toxicity from the drug found in Elena's tea, not with the natural progression of hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. Diego shouldn't have died for years, possibly decades, with proper management." For the next 2 days, we prepared intensively for the hearing. Dr. Morgan's testimony provided the medical expertise we had been missing, directly connecting Elena's actions to Diego's death. Combined with the phone records, the analysis of the tea in Sophia's journal, our case was stronger than ever. The night before the hearing, Richard Blackwood made a surprising public statement announcing his resignation from all business positions to focus on family during this difficult time. He expressed unwavering support for his daughter Elena, who he claimed was the victim of a malicious campaign by a mentally unstable mother-in-law. "He's distancing himself," Patricia observed as we watched the press conference, setting Elena up as the sole responsible party while portraying himself as the devoted father standing by his troubled daughter. "Will it work?" I asked. "Not if I have anything to say about it," Patricia replied with grim determination. "Tomorrow we bring the whole truth to light. All of it." The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters and spectators as we arrived for the hearing. The Blackwood case had captured public attention with its elements of wealth power, family betrayal, and murder. Patricia guided me through the crowd, Sophia close behind us, her face partially hidden by large sunglasses. Dr. Morgan and Gabriel followed with Javier bringing up the rear, his watchful eyes scanning for any threats. Inside the courtroom, the tension was palpable. Richard Blackwood sat alone in the front row behind his team of lawyers, his usual confident demeanor replaced by a haggard weariness. Victoria's seat remained empty. She was still hospitalized, reportedly unconscious. Elena sat separately with her own attorney, a young woman who looked overwhelmed by the case she'd been assigned. Judge Gonzalez entered, her expression severe as she surveyed the packed courtroom. "Before we begin," she announced, "I want to address the extraordinary public interest in this case. This is a court of law, not a theater. The serious allegations being made deserve sober consideration, not sensationalism. Anyone disrupting these proceedings will be immediately removed." Thomas Winters rose first, presenting the Blackwoods' motion to dismiss based on insufficient evidence and procedural irregularities. Judge Gonzalez denied it without hesitation, citing the substantial body of evidence Patricia had submitted. Furthermore, she added, the court has received a sealed document from Phoenix Memorial Hospital that will be considered as part of these proceedings. The document was delivered under medical privacy protocols, but was explicitly addressed to this court by Victoria Blackwood. Richard visibly stiffened at this announcement, clearly unaware of his wife's actions. Patricia presented our case methodically, building a compelling narrative of greed, deception, and murder. Doctor. Morgan testified about Diego's medical condition and the unnatural acceleration of his symptoms. Forensic accountants detailed the Blackwoods' financial motivations for acquiring Aguila Vista. Tech experts confirmed that Diego's recordings had not been tampered with. Then came Sophia's testimony, clear, detailed, and devastating. She described watching her mother prepare the special tea, noting her father's declining health after drinking it, and overhearing conversations between her mother and grandparents about accelerating the timeline. Her journal provided contemporaneous documentation of events that matched perfectly with phone records and Diego's own notes. Throughout her testimony, Elena stared at the table, never meeting her daughter's eyes. Richard, however, watched Sophia with a calculating expression that made my blood run cold. During a brief recess, Patricia received a text that made her eyes widen. "Isabella is back," she whispered to me. "She just arrived at the courthouse with a U.S. Marshal. Witness protection. They've been hiding her since Victoria's hospitalization." My relief at knowing my sister was safe mingled with renewed hope for our case. Isabella's testimony could be the final piece we needed to connect all the evidence. When court resumed, Isabella took the stand visibly nervous but determined. She recounted her financial entanglement with the Blackwoods, how they had used her to spy on me, and most damning conversations she had overheard at the Blackwood estate directly implicating Richard in planning Diego's death. Richard said the cardiac stimulant was untraceable, Isabella testified. He told Elena that if Diego wouldn't sell Aguila Vista voluntarily, they needed to accelerate his natural exit to ensure the property transferred to Elena before any mining competitors discovered the deposits. As Isabella spoke, I watched Richard's face. His expression remained impassive, but a muscle twitched in his jaw, the only indication that her words affected him. Elena's attorney attempted to challenge Isabella's credibility, highlighting her gambling history and financial dependence on the Blackwoods. But Isabella remained composed, her testimony consistent under cross-examination. "My final question," Patricia said when it was her turn again. "Ms. Mendoza, why did you decide to come forward now despite the personal risk?" Isabella looked directly at me. "Because some things matter more than fear or self-preservation. My nephew was murdered. My sister lost her only child. Sophia lost her father." Her voice broke slightly. "I couldn't live with myself if I stayed silent just to protect my own interests." The afternoon brought the most dramatic testimony yet. Judge Gonzalez unsealed Victoria's hospital document, a detailed confession written before her suicide attempt, outlining the entire conspiracy. Victoria described how Richard had discovered the mineral deposits at Aguila Vista through confidential geological surveys conducted by a company he controlled. When Diego refused to sell, Richard had researched untraceable methods to accelerate Diego's heart condition, pressuring Elena to administer the drugs in his food and drinks. "I did not want my daughter to become a murderer," Victoria had written. But Richard insisted it was necessary for the family legacy. The business was overextended from his political ambitions, and the Aguila Vista minerals represented financial salvation. May God forgive us all. Richard's attorney immediately challenged the document's admissibility, claiming Victoria had been mentally unstable and under medication when she wrote it. Judge Gonzalez allowed the objection, but noted that the confession aligned with substantial independent evidence already presented. The final witness of the day was unexpected, a former security guard from Blackwood Enterprises named Michael Torres. He testified that Richard had ordered him to follow Diego and report on his activities, particularly his visits to Aguila Vista. When Diego began showing signs of suspicion, Richard had instructed Torres to install spyware on Diego's computers and phones. Mr. Blackwood was obsessed with what Mr. Mendoza was doing at that ranch, Torres testified. He said it was a family matter, but it felt wrong. When I heard Mr. Mendoza had died and then saw the news about these hearings, I knew I had to come forward. By late afternoon, the evidence against Richard and Elena seemed overwhelming. Elena's attorney requested a brief recess to consult with her client. When they returned, Elena's demeanor had completely changed. Gone was the defeated posture, replaced by cold determination. "Your Honor," her attorney announced, "my client wishes to make a statement." Elena approached the witness stand, her eyes fixed on Richard rather than the judge. "I want to clarify my role in these events." She began, her voice stronger than I'd heard it throughout the proceedings. "I did administer medication to Diego without his knowledge at my father's insistence. He told me it would only make Diego sick enough to agree to sell Aguila Vista, not kill him. Richard's face darkened as his daughter continued. When Diego's condition worsened dramatically, I wanted to stop. I told my father we had gone too far, but he threatened to disinherit me, to take Sophia away, to destroy everything if I didn't continue. Elena took a shaky breath. I was weak. I was afraid of my father. I've always been afraid of him, but I never wanted Diego to die. Objection, Richard's attorney shouted. This is clearly an attempt to shift blame. Let her speak, Judge Gonzalez ordered. Elena turned to face Sophia. I know you can never forgive me. I can never forgive myself. But you should know that your father suspected what was happening. The night before he died, he told me he knew everything. He said he had prepared for this possibility, that the truth would come out. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. He said to tell you he loved you more than anything in this world. The courtroom was utterly silent as Elena returned to her seat. Richard stared at her with undisguised fury, all pretense of family unity abandoned. Judge Gonzalez called for closing arguments. Patricia delivered ours with powerful simplicity, focusing on Diego's vision for Aguila Vista and the lengths to which the Blackwoods had gone to steal it. Richard's attorney attempted to salvage their position by painting Richard as a businessman who may have been aggressive but never intended actual harm, and Elena as the true culprit who had exceeded her father's instructions. As the hearing concluded, Judge Gonzalez announced she would deliver her ruling the following morning. This case presents extraordinary circumstances that require careful consideration of both legal and ethical dimensions, she explained. I will review all evidence overnight before rendering judgment. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions as we made our way to Patricia's car. I held Sophia close, shielding her from the cameras. The day had been emotionally exhausting for all of us, particularly hearing Elena's partial confession and her message from Diego. What do you think will happen? Sophia asked as we drove back to the safe house. Richard and Elena will both face criminal charges, Patricia replied. The evidence is too strong for any other outcome. The only question is the severity manslaughter versus murder accomplice versus co-conspirator. And Aguila Vista, I asked. The property will remain in your name as Diego intended. The court might impose some conditions regarding the mineral rights given their national significance, but the ranch itself will be yours to preserve Diego's vision. Sophia leaned against me in the back seat, her voice barely audible. Do you think Mom was telling the truth about Dad knowing about his message? I stroked her hair gently. I think your father was incredibly intelligent and perceptive. If he suspected what was happening, he would have taken steps to protect his legacy and to ensure justice. And I know without any doubt that he loved you more than anything in this world. That night I dreamed of Diego not as the gaunt figure from his final videos, but as the vibrant, passionate man he had been before illness and betrayal had marked him. In the dream, he showed me around Aguila Vista, pointing out features I hadn't yet discovered: a hidden spring, a cave with ancient petroglyphs, a ridge where eagles nested each spring. Take care of it, Mom, he said, his smile warm and real. It's more special than anyone realizes. I woke with tears on my cheeks, but a sense of peace in my heart. Whatever the judge decided, we had brought the truth to light. Diego's legacy would endure. The courthouse was even more crowded for the judge's ruling. News of Elena's testimony had spread, and the public's fascination with the case had intensified. Security was heightened, with additional officers posted throughout the building. Richard arrived looking defiant, flanked by his attorneys. Elena entered separately, pale and subdued. Victoria remained hospitalized, her condition reportedly stabilized but still serious. Judge Gonzalez began with a summary of the case, methodically reviewing the key evidence and testimony. Her expression remained impassive as she outlined the legal standards applicable to the various claims and counterclaims. In cases of this complexity, she said, the court must distinguish between moral culpability and legal liability. Based on the preponderance of evidence, I find the following. She looked directly at Richard. Richard Blackwood, this court finds that you orchestrated a deliberate plan to accelerate Diego Mendoza's heart condition with the specific intent of gaining control of Aguila Vista Ranch for its mineral resources. Your actions were premeditated, systematic, and showed callous disregard for human life. I am referring this case to the district attorney with a strong recommendation for charges of first-degree murder, conspiracy, witness, intimidation, and obstruction of justice. Richard's face reddened, but he remained silent as the judge continued. Elena Blackwood Mendoza, this court finds that you actively participated in administering harmful substances to your husband, despite knowing they could cause serious harm or death. While accepting that you acted under your father's influence and pressure, the fact remains that you had multiple opportunities to seek help or stop your actions. I am referring your case to the district attorney with a recommendation for charges of second-degree murder and conspiracy. Elena closed her eyes, a single tear sliding down her cheek. Regarding Victoria Blackwood, given her current medical condition and her cooperation through her written confession, I am deferring judgment, pending her recovery and further proceedings. Judge Gonzalez then turned to the civil matters at hand. Aguila Vista Ranch is hereby confirmed as the legal property of Eva Mendoza, as specified in Diego Mendoza's valid will. All claims by the Blackwood family are dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, the court grants permanent sole custody of Sofia Mendoza to her grandmother, Eva Mendoza, with no visitation rights for Elena Blackwood Mendoza until and unless Sofia, upon reaching adulthood, chooses to establish contact. A murmur ran through the courtroom at this comprehensive ruling. Finally, Judge Gonzalez concluded, given the national significance of the mineral deposits at Aguila Vista Ranch, the court strongly recommends that Mrs. Mendoza work with appropriate federal agencies to ensure responsible stewardship of these resources. However, the decision to mine or preserve the land remains entirely at her discretion as the lawful owner. She struck her gavel once firmly. This ruling is effective immediately. Court is adjourned. As Richard was led away by court officers to be formally arrested, he locked eyes with me briefly. There was no remorse in his gaze, only cold fury at having been thwarted. Elena was similarly detained, though she seemed almost relieved, as if a great burden had been lifted. Outside, surrounded by Patricia's security team, we made a brief statement to the press. Justice has been served today, I said, my voice steady. My son Diego created something beautiful and important at Aguila Vista Ranch. His vision was not just about conservation or resources, but about responsible stewardship of the land for future generations. My granddaughter Sofia and I intend to honor that vision and ensure that Diego's legacy continues. Questions shouted by reporters blended into an indistinguishable roar as we made our way to Patricia's car. The legal battle was over, but the emotional aftermath was just beginning. Sofia had lost both parents in different ways, one to death, one to betrayal and prison. I had lost my son. Isabella had nearly lost herself in the Blackwood's web of manipulation, but we had also gained something precious, the truth painful as it was, and the chance to honor Diego's memory by protecting what he had valued. 2 weeks later, Sofia and I returned to Aguila Vista Ranch. The court-appointed security had been replaced by our own staff, including Javier, who had been officially hired as ranch manager. The Blackwoods' private security was long gone, and with them the sense of threat that had pervaded the property. As we drove through the gates, Sofia's face lit up at the sight of the horses in the pasture. "Dad loved those horses," she said softly, "especially the black one, Midnight. He said Midnight reminded him of a horse in a story Abuelo Carlos used to tell. Your grandfather's stories about the legendary black stallion," I remembered with a smile. Diego would sit for hours listening to those tales. The main house welcomed us with warm familiarity, as if Diego's spirit lingered in its walls. We wandered through the rooms, Sofia asking questions about her father's work, his plans, his dreams for the ranch. Javier gave us a comprehensive tour of the sustainable systems Diego had designed, the water conservation infrastructure, the solar and wind power generation, the experimental crops. Everything spoke of Diego's intelligence and foresight, his commitment to creating something that would last beyond his own life. "There's something else you should see," Javier said as evening approached. He led us to a part of the property we hadn't explored before a small rise overlooking the valley where a single oak tree provided shade. Beneath it stood a simple stone bench. Diego called this his thinking spot, Javier explained. He'd come here at sunset to watch the light change over the mountains. Sofia and I sat on the bench watching as the setting sun painted the Arizona sky in spectacular shades of orange, pink, and purple. In the distance, the mountains Diego had loved so much turned a deep, mystic blue. "It's beautiful," Sofia whispered. "I can see why Dad loved this place." "He built it for the future," I said. "For you, really. Everything he did was with you in mind." As darkness fell, we reluctantly headed back to the main house. In the kitchen, Javier had prepared a simple dinner of Diego's favorite foods: green chili enchiladas, fresh corn, and flan for dessert. A homecoming celebration, he explained with a gentle smile. After dinner, as Sophia explored the bookshelves in the living room, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The War Room. Midnight. Come alone. I stared at the message, unease creeping through me. The War Room had been thoroughly searched by our security team and sealed. Who would know about it, much less have access? When Sophia went to bed exhausted from the emotional day, I slipped out of the house. The desert night was cool and clear, stars blazing overhead as I made my way to the old barn. The padlock on the door had been removed, I noticed with alarm. Inside the trapdoor to the War Room stood open, a faint light glowing from below. I descended cautiously, one hand gripping the pepper spray Patricia had insisted I carry. The War Room looked different. The evidence boards and files were gone, replaced by maps and what appeared to be architectural drawings of Aguila Vista. A laptop sat open on the central table, its screen showing a live feed of the main house. "Who's there?" I called, my voice steadier than I felt. From the shadows at the far end of the room, a figure emerged, thin-bearded with hollowed cheeks but unmistakably familiar eyes. "Diego," I gasped, stumbling backward, certain I was hallucinating. "No, it's not possible." "Mom," he said, his voice hoarse but achingly familiar. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything you've been through." I reached out a trembling hand, touching his face, his arm confirming he was solid, real. "How we buried you. I saw your body." A man who looked very much like me. John Reyes, a homeless veteran with no family who died of natural causes the day before my death. With the right connections and enough money, death certificates can be arranged. Diego's smile was sad. "I didn't want to deceive you, but it was the only way to ensure the Blackwoods would reveal their true intentions. You faked your death, put us through all that grief." Anger flashed through my shock. "Sophia has been devastated." "I know," he said, regret heavy in his voice. "It was the hardest decision I've ever made. But Richard Blackwood was too powerful, too protected. The only way to bring him down was to let him believe he'd won. The evidence, the videos, the food tests, all real. Elena was poisoning me, but I discovered it early and began taking antidotes. The symptoms were partly real, partly exaggerated to make them believe their plan was working." Diego ran a hand through his longer, unkempt hair. "I needed them to believe I was dead so they would move openly to take Aguila Vista. Only then would their true motives be exposed." I sat heavily in a chair, my mind reeling. "Who knew, Javier?" Diego nodded. "Javier helped arrange everything, and Gabriel knew parts of the plan. No one else. It was too dangerous. If you or Sophia had known, your reactions wouldn't have been genuine. The Blackwoods would have suspected." "Where have you been all this time?" "Here mostly, living in the old line shack on the north boundary, monitoring everything through the security systems." His eyes filled with tears. "Watching you fight for me, watching Sophia suffer, it's been hell." Despite my shock and lingering anger, I found myself pulling him into a fierce embrace, feeling his too thin frame, smelling the familiar scent that confirmed this was truly my son. "Sophia needs to know," I said when I finally released him. "Tonight. Now." Diego nodded. "That's why I contacted you. The Blackwoods are no longer a threat. It's time to come back to life." Together we walked back to the main house under the vast Arizona sky. As we approached, I saw a light come on in the living room. Sophia stood at the window, clearly having noticed my absence. "Are you ready?" I asked Diego. He took a deep breath. "No, but she deserves the truth." When we entered, Sophia turned, her expression changing from concern to shock to disbelief as she recognized her father. "Dad," she whispered, frozen in place. "Dad." Diego moved toward her slowly. "It's me, mi vida. It's really me." With a cry that contained both joy and anguish, Sophia threw herself into her father's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. Diego held her tightly, his own tears flowing freely as he murmured apologies and endearments in mixed English and Spanish. I watched them, my heart both breaking and healing at the same sight. The road ahead would be complicated legal questions about Diego's reappearance, the psychological impact of his deception, rebuilding trust and relationships. But in this moment, seeing my son and granddaughter reunited, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Diego was alive. Sophia had her father back. Aguila Vista was safe. Justice had been served. And the message on my phone that had started this journey, "Mom, I am still alive," had turned out to be the most precious truth of all.